We are getting really close to having a playable test level with like the new style and a new like level design philosophy that I'm going to be using for the game. For that, we need one final thing to be functioning, and that is the collectibles. The way the levels are going to work is you're going to start in the middle and then have a couple of branching paths. Every single path is going to have a collectible, and those collectibles you need to bring back to the middle point, and once you've collected them all, you've finished the level. For this test build, I'm just going to make a couple of basic shapes, but I'll take you through just me making the very simple models for that, and then we're going to program in the actual like collection and delivery mechanics of that. And after we're done with that, we should be ready to ship the game to some beta testers again. That'd be interesting. So we're going to keep things relatively simple. I'm going to use this default cube as the basis for the first shape. We're going to copy that over, and then we're going to go into edit mode and make it a little bit thicker, a little bit less high, put it down a little bit, and then going into the modifier stack, we're going to go with a Boolean modifier. And there we go. Theoretically, that's the slot, and that's the item. I'm going to do that with a cylinder with like 4 objects in total, and that'll be everything we use for the time being. I'll also be making a object in which these two are combined. So we duplicate these, then we join them. Together. That's Ctrl J. The reason I'm doing that is because in the eventual blueprint system that I'm going to be using, let me show. This is going to be a separate object at the end of the branch path. This is going to be an object that's in the middle of the level, but once you deliver it, it's going to turn into this, which is going to be the same actor as this one. It's just going to swap out the mesh. And the reason I don't just put this one into that one is because that might work if I have a similarly sized and shaped mesh going into every single slot. But every single level, every single collectible is going to probably look relatively different. So using a method like this, I am importing a lot of models, maybe unnecessarily twice, but it gives me a very easy way to just say when I insert collectible into slot, just change into filled the filled mesh, rather than having to fuck about with making sure that they line up properly and stuff like that. And if you do that, things can glitch out, and this is just a lot more reliable doing it this way. So, and technically there are still 2 separate meshes, so I guess there's that. I'll do you one better. I was planning on having these all shaped, like the slot for this one, also shaped like the cylinder. I think I'm going to be even more lazy, because again, do be aware that this is very much just for testing purposes. So if I just duplicate this and change the Boolean object from being the cube to being the cylinder, now we have something for the cylinder to go into. And the upside to that is that it will be easy to make it look at least somewhat neat, because I'll be able to, they're the exact same dimensions, they just have different objects going into them. So is this a little lazy? Yeah, but it's for prototyping purposes. Who fucking cares? I guess we can get a cone and rotate it 180 degrees. That might work. It's a little ugly, but again, it's a prototype, so I don't really care about it being ugly. Just has to be functional. And let's go with the icosphere for the last one. I was thinking do a pyramid, but having something that's slightly round, not a bad idea. Again, I don't know why I'm thinking about this so much. It's literally just to have placeholders. These are going to be different things within the game anyway. Things that I'm going to spend a bunch more time on than I am on this right now, I'm telling you that much. Eventually I might also make it so that these get animated, joining in together. Depending on how much of a headache that ends up being, that would kind of look neat, right? That would look really good. But if that ends up being too much of a headache, I'm just not going to bother doing that. Actually, thinking about it right now, that shouldn't be that big a deal, because every single one is going to have different meshes. but more or less should still be able to use the same bone system, which is one bone for the slot and one bone for the object. So I should just be able to apply the same animation to every single one of them, because they should all be able to scare a skeleton, just with different like models and different meshes with different weight painting. I think that should work. I'm not going to test it right now, but I think it should work. Now all those objects are here, brought over into Unreal. The material really does not matter too much. Some of these have materials, others don't. It doesn't matter again. Matter of fact, I'm just going to delete the material as is. That should replace it all with the basic grid material, and now I can get to programming. Okay, so first things first, we add a static mesh, which we call slot mesh. Then we add another static, static mesh, which we call field mesh. So we have two static meshes, which are both going to also be variables. And we do that by adding a variable here we call field mesh, and then going over here and telling that this is a static mesh variable. And then we figure out which one that is again. Static mesh, there we go. So that's static mesh up reference. We put that on public. Then we copy that and we call the second one empty. And we also have that on public. So now when we put this into the world, we should be able to see both of those and put in some meshes there. Thing is, if we do that right now, nothing fucking happens because we haven't told the engine to do anything with that. So on the construction script, which is the first thing that runs when this thing gets built, we're going to set the empty slots and the filled slots to be set. Hold on, no, we're going to take these two, and I'm going to static mesh for both of them. So we're going to copy paste that, fill, this is empty slot is going to be that mesh, and filled slot is going to be that mesh. So now in theory, and then on begin play, we could do that in the construction script, but that gets a little iffy sometimes. So on begin play, we set visibility for this one to being so now, as you can see, we have a mesh here. So let's go back to where I had the test meshes a moment ago, and say, for instance, we want to have the cone slot. So we just tell you use the cone slot. That's the filled one. That also should be rotated around about 90 degrees for things to look properly. That's not the filled one. I am just blind, turns out. And we probably want the entire actor to be a teeny tiny bit smaller as well. So then clip this into the wall over here, because this is where we're going to come back to place all these actors down when we finally get to that. Now when we start up the game itself, you will see that in fact we have the empty slot over here because it's set to invisible. From here it's really as easy as just giving this an index variable and checking the index variable against a separate actor, whether they have the same variable integer. If they match, you change from one to the other. From one mesh to the other, that is. So then in the level goal object, which is a separate blueprint, as I said, we're going to get rid of one of these because this is just going to be the object. So we can get rid of one of these as well, that doesn't matter. So call this object mesh, get object, take mesh, object mesh, and it's as easy as that. So now we can put the, where do we have, there we have it. Now we can put this in here and call this, let's say cone. There we go. Should be a little smaller to match this size. Should be 0.5. And this object would be at the end of like one of these branches over here or all the way up there. But for testing purposes, I'm going to obviously place it right next to each other. Now let's make this thing pick upable. Is that a word? It is now. first and foremost. So for that, we're going to add a collision box. The collision box is actually going to be set box extend, and that's going to be a variable, and that variable is going to be a public one because we'll be able to set that within the level editor itself. So by default, let's go for 100, 100, and 100, but then we can set as being anything we want. So at the moment that's a little small maybe, but if we set this to 250 by 250, it's very editable on a object by object basis now, and that should be, at least for right now, good enough. Then we have a overlap component, start and stop. So overlap components, I don't need to write component, and overlap. With that we can check, if I spell it properly, check player character somewhere in here. Overlap player check, that's a little macro that I made myself, which just gets the other actor, compares it to the player character. If that's the same, it goes out to the output. If that's false, nothing happens. That's just to make sure that any overlapping events only trigger when the player overlaps and not when any other like AI pawn overlaps. So we just hook this into the other actor, we copy paste that because that's going to be required for both. And those will both be hooked up into a gate. Let's actually see, because we might be able to use a multi-gate here. I've never used one before. I don't think that's really what we want to have happen here. So we open the gate when we go into the overlapping box. We close the gate again when we exit out of the overlapping box. This makes it so that when you want to like press a button, that button press will only work once you're inside the collision box. Once you exit it again, the button press won't work. Obviously, it's a good idea to also like pop up with a with a little widget or screen message to tell the player you can actually now do this thing. But we'll get to that when we get to that. So for this, I'm going to use the same input as a checkpoint, I think, which is Q or the top face button. So Q, or in the case of PlayStation, will be the triangle button. Because I don't really feel like it's really necessary to have two separate buttons for that, as they will never overlap at the same time. So I'm just going to use the checkpoint input for this. So then we have checkpoints input. When that is pressed, we enter the gate, which will only happen again if we are also overlapping. So we might want to add in some widget before the gate here again to just make sure that there is a message up for the player to see, but we'll add that at the very end once we know things actually work. Well, once that happens, we want to start the actual collecting of this item. So we're going to add a timeline here because I do want to animate this a little bit, not too much, but I want to animate it a little bit. And then we're going to set scale for the entire actor, preferably. Set actor scale 3D, there we go. And that can just easily go from add a track here, vector. No, we don't need a vector track, that's my bad. We want to have a float track. So he literally goes from time 0 value 1, which is at the start, he's got a scale of 1. And then time 1, after a second, he's got a value of 0, which is nothing at all. And that we put into there, so it's uniformly scaling down at all the axes. We could also have it move towards the player character. I might add that at some point, but again, for the time being, this should work fairly well. When that is finished, we should also have a index variable here, by the way. That can be an integer, no problem. Because that will get then cast to an array for the player controller. So the player controller knows which objects it's holding and which ones it's not. So let's here in the player controller actually add that array. So that is item indexes. Actually, let's call them level goal indexes, just because I will probably otherwise forget what the hell I actually meant with that. And that's going to be an array because it's going to help potentially multiple values at once. If you want to have him only be able to carry one item at a time, you will have to write in some protection where if this is already filled by another object, you can't override it, but you would keep it at just a single variable. I want to be able to have people, if they somehow break the game and want to collect multiple before going back to the start, that's fine with me. I don't mind that. As a matter of fact, I would actually think that's kind of neat. So once we finish the timeline, we cast to player controller. Roam is what it's called. We get player controller as an object reference here, and then we get the array we just made, get level goal index, and then we add to that the index we just made. So this is new item to the array. So it doesn't really matter at which position it is, because there's never going to be two objects in the same level that have the same index. And it's going to check the whole array anyway for every single time we try to turn in one of these objects. So order doesn't really matter. You could make it so that they go from largest to smallest or the other way around. That's needlessly complex. Actually, that's going to take more computing power than just going through the 4 or 5 entries that we need anyway. And after we do that, just as a measure of optimizing to a certain extent, we also want to destroy this actor. But we also probably want to add it to our destroyed actors list so that if we have a checkpoint, we don't mess that up. Which does make me think we probably want to add this variable to our checkpoint as well. We'll get into that in a moment. So we then cast to the game mode, get the actors destroyed, and add to that a reference self. Get reference to self, add myself to this actor array so that we either get respawned or not, depending on whether or not we've been collected before or after. I don't know if the variables in the player controller will get reloaded on reloading the map. I'm assuming that they will. So I'll need to program in this casting to that into the save file as well. Because if you collect this thing, then get a checkpoint, then die, it will destroy this on loading the map again, but you won't actually have it registered as being collected, which obviously not a good thing, because at that point you are very much soft locked. It's been a while since I've had to fuck around a lot with this save system in Unreal, so I'm a little rusty on it. I think if I just make this level goal index, I'm also getting a text midway through this recording, which always just fucking happens. And I just, when I reach the checkpoint, add to this and then save the checkpoint. That should do it, I think. Really, the reason that I am mostly confused about this is because I had to use the whole save object system this week in a side project that I'm working on, which video will be up at some point once I get around to actually editing the video. The game has been made at this point. That really threw me for a loop because it just did not end up working at all. But I used it for a level editor and not for like saving simple variables, which really the level editor was saving variable. Anyway, hopefully this will just work as easily as that. So here within the game mode, I think if I just drag this off a little whiles away and I go to cast to checkpoint save, which is this line over here, and I say get level goal index. Of course, I mean set level goal index. If we do that, and then I get the level goal index from casting to player controller roam, and that one we get the level object goal index, whatever you want to call it. That should then update this when I run into, and everything should in theory work now. Question is, testing this is a whole other matter. But first things first, let's see. Okay, that's not a great start. It just does not show up in the world. Why would that be, babe? That would be because... Actually, I have no idea. I was going to say because I haven't set a mesh, but I definitely have. Probably because this is fucking weirded, I imagine. Yeah, that was the reason. Okay, so you probably don't have any collision yet, do you? Well, actually, it seems like you might. You do have collision. Okay, I don't know that I want you to have collision. Could you please fuck off? I'm trying to test you. Thank you. You don't do anything, but I like killing you. Okay, so now if I press this button, it does fucking nothing. Okay, why doesn't it do anything? Let's see, if we put a print string in there, just to see when we start overlapping the box, does it do something? It does print that string, so then logically speaking, it should open the gate. Next step in the process is, does it register my button press? Print string. That would be the issue, I imagine. It's not registering my button press at all for reasons. It's clearly stating here that Q should work, right? So Q. So why is Q not working? Test whether or not seeing releasing the key does work. I don't see why that would work, but yeah, it doesn't. If I connect up my PlayStation 4 controller, that button does not work either. That is very curious. I don't quite understand how that doesn't do what I intended to do. Yeah, I probably want to enable input here for myself, and then when we disconnect we want to disable input. I think that is the thing that's fucking. So let's test that again. Now when I do this I should have enabled input and it should work, but it doesn't because still reasons. I thought I'd figured it out myself, but it seems like maybe Googling will be in order. Player controller. Okay, that does actually like get player controller. Hooking that up. Maybe just looking at the nodes that you're throwing into your blueprint can help. Sometimes that helps. You'd be surprised. Like looking at what you're working on actually might fix your shit. In this case it does, never mind. So that just works. So we can get rid of the print string. So let me repeat that a little bit less surprised than I was before, to pretend like this was the plan all along. So if I now walk up to this and press the Q button, because it still is an issue. Of course it still is an issue. Set actor 3D scale. We're going to do this differently. We're going to loop. And that works perfectly well. The thing is, if we get actor 3D scale, and we just, it's a uniform scale anyway, so we split the structure up in, we just get the Z, loop that to 0. Now it will always loop from what it is to 0 rather than from 1 to 0. So it should not have that little jump cut type thing happening now. Of course, we also need to reverse the keyframes for that. Say how fucking many things there are to take into consideration when making something as simple as this, and how fucking stupid I am for forgetting literally every single one of them. So there we go. It's been collected now. So now we just need to make something similar but opposite for this actor, and we've got a collection system. I figured, you know what? Programming on an empty stomach, no good at all. So I had a bit of dinner, and now we're going to work on the second half of this project. Why am I moving? Does it have something to do with the controller? I bet it has something to do with the controller. It had something to do with the goddamn controller. Anyway, so yeah, this is going to work very similarly, but instead of doing things like casting to the save game, which we actually do need to also do the loading part of, remind me of that, we're going to just compare to the player character or the player controller, which is a lot less hassling to deal with. So let's just copy over this box, and let's also copy over this construction script for the box, because why would I remake something that I've already made? It's literally the exact same thing. So that should be also copy over the box extend, which should be a public variable. Probably is going to carry over the fact that it's public. It does. That's very, very nice. Then we can go into the event thing here, copy over this entire gate setup, which we don't need any of this. And that is that. Now, before we go into this gate, we do want to cast to player controller, because we want to get the level go index array, and we need to give this thing a index value as well, which is going to be a publicly available variable. Have I set that for this as well? No, I had not yet. Now I have. And then we're just going to compare in a for each loop. So after that, we go into this for each loop, and then we're just going to check whether or not the array element is equal to our current index. And if that is true, which only should be true once, because you can only collect that once, we then go into the gate, and otherwise we don't do anything. If there, for any reason whatsoever, would be a double entry there, I would like to be able to abort this loop. So let's see if we can do that. Okay, so we've got a variation on the for each loop, which is the for each loop with break. And if we do that, we should be able to also add in a break here. So we go into this branch still, and then the question is though, because I want to also break you when I do that, but then I don't have anything that goes into the gate. That being said, that probably counts as it being completed, right? But I only want you to answer if you are true still. I guess I can do this check again after it completes. No, I cannot. That is a bit of an issue. I mean, I guess I can break at the very end of everything that's happening here. Yeah. It's just a failsafe anyway, right? In case there somehow is two of the same index in that array, so that it doesn't fire twice and just mess things up. It shouldn't ever happen to begin with. But by that logic, no bugs should ever exist within any code, so let's just build it in anyway. So let's give you a filled in Boolean variable, because we're going to need to have to track that as well. That will be set to being true, and then we set this and this to being set visible, context sensitive please, to false, and set visibility for filled to being set visibility and ray tracing. That is also very good to know that that's a thing, but that's not what I'm looking for. Set visibility, that's what I need. So set visibility for these both. This is going to be false. This one will be set to true. So in theory, if we now set these box extends to, like, let's set these to 400, so they're a little bit bigger than the other one. If we go into this now and we press Q, nothing should happen. But now if we press Q with that being absorbed, still nothing happens. I knew that was too easy. I mean, we did just check an index value, which actually that should have been equal still, because we haven't set any index values, and I didn't compare it to the index value from the level. I did. No, I definitely did. So why does that not work? Hold on, let me try again by setting this index to 1 for both of you, and then trying again, because absorbing you is not a problem, but then I don't know why it's so laggy. You should definitely... Oh, no, that worked. That worked. That definitely worked. And that's that. That's literally all there is to it. So after this is done, we break you just because we don't need to see anything else. I don't know why it didn't like immediately work the first time though. Is it just because like this needs to be a little... That's the wrong dimension. Like this needs to be a little higher so that the overlap works better or something? Let's give that a shot, because that should be... It's not a matter of waiting. It only does it the second time I press Q. That is odd.
1 hour later.
I forgot to do a very, very important thing, and that is length use last keyframe. Now it will not have a length of 5 seconds, it will have a length depending on what the last keyframe is, in this case 1 second. What I did before is it waited the entire 5 seconds for it to be added. which in normal gameplay actually wouldn't be an issue, funnily enough. But now, it's fixed. There we go. This is literally as easy as it is. Right now, all I have to do is get a clear condition for checking the variables in all of these like stations. And once all of those have been cleared, I can just like make a portal appear as a level exit. This is it. This is literally everything there is to it. I can place this over, let's say, here. And now I have to make my way through all of these enemies, which is not that difficult, admittedly, because you can more or less just dash the fuck through them. But still, let's do this real quick. Yeah, also with my particle systems porting over to Unreal 5. Don't know if I've talked about that yet. This is Unreal 5. The particle systems got kind of like reset for like the default included ones. So what was purple fire before is just fire now with smoke added to it again. All the particle systems that I made on my own are more or less fine. They do get included in the post-processing effects now though, which is kind of neat. I was honestly, you know what? This is a perfect opportunity to test. That should not happen. Okay, that is an issue, because if I now kill myself again, at least that gets reset, but... Oh, and so if I get killed by an enemy, I die a different way? That actually seems true. I seem to remember something of the sort. So I'm going to need to figure out that whole HP situation as well. Yeah, so if I die by touching an enemy, which is something that I have to fix anyway. Holy shit, it's good that I figured that out. It just resets me back to the starting position instead of actually killing me like the kill zone does down there. But that does raise an interesting question, which I have not yet tested. So that's very good that we run into this. So let's put you back where you belong. Or where you don't belong, actually. Let's put you back in your testing position, rather. And let's add in a checkpoint, because that's something that I really wanted to know, is whether or not collecting these things gets saved in a checkpoint yet. So right now, I can die and everything will be fine. Setting this checkpoint now, which has no message because the aspect ratio. If I die now, will that thing respawn? It does. Do you remember me having the thing? You don't. So the checkpoint stuff just straight up doesn't work yet.